this video, I will be discussing how to become more advanced with your spell work. We will also discuss the art of manipulation in terms of manipulating your own energy, the energy around you, what manipulation actually means, and how to manipulate a situation to gain the desired effect. As this video progresses, we will move deeper and deeper into more abstract concepts. Also, I will be crafting some of my own spells during this video, so feel free to enjoy the visual as we go along, or you can put this video on in the background and simply listen to the audio. You do not have to pay attention to what I am visually doing here. I just didn't want to sit in front of a camera for this video. But before we begin, we need to better define some of the terms I will be using. Oftentimes, the word manipulation can have a negative connotation, but I want to clarify that all witches and magical practitioners manipulate energy during spells and rituals. Manipulating a situation to get what you want is not always a bad thing. You can manipulate energy or situations to help and heal yourself as well as those around you. So when we discuss the art of manipulation in this video, I want to be crystal clear that we aren't talking about manipulation in the sense of being deceitful or manipulative to harm someone. Although spell work can be used to harm others, it can also be used to heal and better a situation. Also, this video is for intermediate to advanced magical practitioners. If you are a beginner, I highly recommend checking out my video on how to cast a spell. In that video, I discuss how to descend into an altered state of consciousness, how to raise energy, and how to release energy. If you are not familiar with these concepts, please check the video linked below. Otherwise, I will assume that you are already familiar with this terminology throughout the duration of this video. I would like to begin by discussing the typical lifespan of a witch's magical practice, because what we consider advanced magic really varies from person to person. What I might consider advanced spellcrafting might be different than what you consider advanced, and vice versa. So in that respect, it is important that we start from the beginning and work our way forward. I want to make sure that when I discuss more abstract concepts later in this video, that we all have some common ground to stand on. In the beginning, a beginner witch will typically start their magical journey by working with their own energy to understand the basics of energy manipulation. This includes centering your energy, grounding to the earth, directing, raising, and releasing your energy, etc. And then we typically branch into learning about other energy sources that we can tap into, such as deities, gods and goddesses, the elements, the planets, the elements as in, tapping into earth, water, fire, and air energies. Some people will branch off and begin learning about the energies of different crystals or plants or trees and how you can incorporate these energies into your spells and rituals. If someone decides to become more ceremonial with the practice, they might learn the 3 C's, which are cleansing, consecrating, and charging. A beginner may also learn about how to cast circles, when to cast circles, and how to protect themselves with warding and banishing rituals. When we discuss spells in particular, a beginner will learn about the anatomy of a spell, how to write intentions properly, etc. I will not be discussing these topics in this video, as I have mentioned this video is more for intermediate to advanced practitioners, but I did want to touch on it. Now, somewhere along the lifespan of a magical practitioner's journey, they will begin to think about the timing of their spells and how to properly time their spells according to their belief system. Some magical practitioners work with the moon phases, some begin to dive into cosmic witchery or planetary magic. I personally found that planetary magic was one of the things that really helped me advance in my craft and gain more success with my spells. Performing spells during a specific moon phase, planetary transit, planetary day, or planetary hour is one way that you can add additional power to your spells. If you haven't considered the timing of your spells previously, this is the first thing that I would recommend to help take your spells and rituals to the next level. Planetary magic can be really complex, but it is well worth the investment. And then a magical practitioner may begin deepening their relationship with the ingredients they're using. There comes a point where you have to ask the question, why am I using this ingredient? Is it because a book said so, or is it because I have a personal relationship with this particular ingredient? Having a personal connection to the ingredients you use in your spells or rituals is extremely important. I discussed this in my plant spirit video, but connecting to the spirit or energy of a particular plant, tree, or crystal that you are using in your spell will make your magical working much more successful, rather than you just throwing in rose petals because you feel like you're supposed to. If you're curious how to connect with plant spirits, feel free to check out that video somewhere on my page. But then magical practitioners start to get real fancy with their spell work. They may start incorporating many different correspondences, including picking the perfect time to cast the spell, and they may start performing invocations or evocations, etc. And as the magical practitioner advances in their craft, they start to fine-tune their intuition. There comes a point where you intuitively know what to do in any given situation. Some of us can become stagnant in our practice at this point, performing the same spells over and over, hitting a magical plateau, and there is this need to go back to basics, to start from the beginning and simplify. Going back to basics of how you are manipulating your energy, what additional energy sources you are using, what ingredients you are using and why, how you are writing your intentions, what your internal dialogue looks like when you are casting these spells, and asking yourself, are you aligning with your highest self? Is your will and your intention present in this spell? Is this something you actually want? Now, going back to being stagnant, if you find that you are becoming stagnant in your practice, I highly recommend trying a completely different style of magic. If you are a folk magic practitioner, try getting into ceremonial magic to learn discipline and precision. And if you are a ceremonial magician, try getting into folk magic to push the limits of your intuition and your creativity. Now, let's start to go deeper. I would like to discuss the concepts of will, intention, action, correspondences, and the subject of a spell. Let's start with will. Many of us are familiar with Aleister Crowley's definition of magic. He once wrote that magic is the science and art of causing change in conformity to will. Our will pertains to the need or strength required for that spell to be successful. Our will pertains to what our soul truly wants. If there is no emotional investment behind the spell that you're casting, if you don't desire it enough, or if it doesn't align with what your soul truly wants, then that spell will most likely not be successful. This is primarily why I don't cast spells for strangers or people that I'm not deeply emotionally invested in. If the emotion or desire is absent, then the spell will not manifest the way that you hope. And I want to point out that sometimes we think we understand our own will and what's best for us, but there is societal conditioning that brainwashes us into believing we need or want certain things that our soul doesn't actually want. Sometimes we can feel we deeply desire something out of a trauma response. To advance your spells, I highly recommend deep diving into shadow work for this exact reason. You need to be in alignment with what your will actually is, rather than operating through a trauma response or societal conditioning. Part of becoming more advanced as a spellcaster is deconditioning and healing yourself. Now, let's talk about intention. You must have a clear intention in your spells for your desires to manifest. That much we should all know as intermediate to advanced practitioners. It doesn't matter if you have the will to succeed if you don't know how to apply it. You'll need to look at how you are wording your intentions and the things you are focusing on. Are you focusing on the symptom or the problem? When you're writing intentions, are you focusing on the things you want or the things that you don't want? I can tell you right now that if you're focusing on the things you don't want rather than the things you do want, you will most likely manifest more of the things you don't want. In my video on how to cast a spell, I spent some time discussing how to write intentions, so I won't spend too much time in this video discussing that, but the intention of a spell is just as important as the will behind it. Let's talk about action. We need to make sure that our day-to-day actions align with our spell work. For example, if you cast a spell to lose weight but then sit on the sofa eating cookies and chips all day, your spell is not going to be effective, plain and simple. We already know this. But it goes deeper than that. What is your internal dialogue throughout the day? If you cast a spell to be more confident and then spend the rest of your day tearing yourself down internally, that confidence spell is not going to work. Bottom line, are your actions in the mundane world matching what you hope to achieve with your spell work? Now let's talk about correspondences. As we already know, correspondences are additional things that you can add into your spells that correspond with the intention of your spell. As I've mentioned previously, it is going to be much more powerful to use a plant from your backyard that you have personally connected to than to use some random herb you bought at a grocery store because other people told you to. You need to have a personal connection to the ingredients you're using. But let's look beyond herbs, crystals, and plants, etc. You can use colors in your spells and rituals that have personal significance to you. Let's take the color yellow, for example. The biopsychology of yellow is very happy and uplifting to the nervous system. It is great for happiness rituals or spells regarding emotional balance, creativity, power, etc. But if you have a grandma that always used to wear the color yellow, then you could use this color in some sort of spell involving your ancestors because of that personal connection you have with your grandma wearing yellow. So yes, knowing what colors represent different things is helpful, but knowing how those colors personally affect you and the memories they invoke for you are just as important, if not more important. You may also consider bringing numerology into your practice as well, learning the numbers 0 through 10 and the significance of these numbers so you can incorporate that into your spells as well. Now that we've discussed will, intention, action, and correspondences, I want to dive even deeper when discussing the subject of your spell. The subject of your spell pertains to the target of your spell. It is who you are casting this spell on or for, whether it's yourself or another person, or maybe the subject is a situation rather than an individual. This conversation topic was inspired by a video I recently did with Cricket Song on her channel. I believe she is uploading that video in a few days, and when she does, I will link it down below. But we had a wonderfully philosophical discussion on free will and how it pertains to casting spells. There's a lot of debate on whether or not we have free will, but regardless of whether we have free will or not, each individual does have some sort of will. It may not be free, but there is some sort of will that each of us possesses. And because of that, I find it is much more effective to cast spells on yourself than it is to cast spells to influence or manipulate another person. When you are casting spells to influence or manipulate another person, you are attempting to override their will with the power of your will. And so it is much easier to manipulate yourself in a given situation to gain the desired effect. For example, let's say you want to cast a spell to get a raise at work. Rather than casting a spell on your boss to manipulate them into giving you a raise, you could cast a spell on yourself to appear more hardworking, more deserving of a raise, etc. You could also cast a spell of confidence to boost up your ability to have that conversation with your boss. Now, there are a million different ways you could go about this, but you get my point. Now we get into the depths of manipulation as an art form. The most advanced technique that, in my opinion, is the hardest to learn and the most effective when it comes to casting spells is knowing how to manipulate your subject and how to manipulate a situation. If you are choosing to cast a spell on another person or for another person, you will need to get into that person's psyche. And this also applies to spell work when you are the subject or a certain situation is the subject. You'll need to learn how to manipulate a situation to gain the desired effect. Now, if your subject is another person or you are wanting to cast a spell on yourself to appear a certain way to another person, you'll need to study your subject in detail. How do they think? How do they communicate? What do they value? When are they most receptive and when are they not? What do they fear and what do they love? I find that natal astrology is extremely helpful in this regard. If I know someone's Mercury sign or their Venus sign, etc., then I am going to better understand how to manipulate the situation when dealing with this person. But you can do this with any form of psychological assessment. Sometimes I even use the Myers-Briggs system to psychoanalyze my subject prior to casting that spell. Anything that is considered an archetypal system is going to be useful here, or you could use your own psychological knowledge. I have also known many people that use the 48 laws of power as part of their manipulation tactics in spell work, or even the use of auras or chakras can be useful here in identifying how to work with your subject. Again, this is an art, not a science. Every person is different, every situation is different, and your methods will need to be adaptable in each scenario. To advance in the art of manipulation, I highly recommend looking into psychological archetypes and even the basics of sociology. To conclude what we have discussed today, in order to become more advanced with your spell casting, you need to dive deeper into your will, intention, action, correspondences, the timing of the spell, do your shadow work, get into psychological archetypes. I know that we've discussed a lot today, so there's definitely a lot to ponder. And I hope that some of these recommendations have been useful to you. And if you have any additional ideas that I have not discussed in this video, please feel free to comment them down below. I would also love to know your opinions on these topics discussed today. Thank you so much for watching, and I wish you true healing on your journey.